How the military JFK autopsy failed a murdered president and history. If you or I suffered a violent death, the local medical examiner's office would conduct a thorough forensic examination to ascertain the means and cause of death to assist the police in its investigation. It is alarming to learn that such an appropriate routine forensic post-mortem examination was not performed on the 35th President of the United States. When President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on November 22, 1963, under Texas state law for a murder in its jurisdiction, the body should have been turned over to Dallas medical examiner Earl Rose for a complete forensic examination to ascertain the means and cause of death. Instead, the Secret Service unlawfully and forcefully took possession of JFK's body from Dallas County officials and flew it back to Washington aboard Air Force One, with disastrous results to follow. Instead of Kennedy's body being handed over to the District of Columbia Medical Examiner's office, the military would take possession. What happened next was astounding. Instead of an experienced civilian forensic pathologist being called upon to conduct JFK's post-mortem examination, since his death was by violent means due to gunshots, 3 unqualified military general hospital pathologists were assigned the task. As legendary forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Weck explained in my first book, Through the Oswald Window, general hospital pathologists specialize in examining organs and tissue slides in cases of death by natural causes. Amazingly, except for minimal study of forensic pathology in medical school by Colonel Pierre Fink, the 3 military general hospital pathologists called upon to conduct the autopsy on President Kennedy had never before conducted an autopsy involving death by violent means. Let that sink in for a moment. This presentation is not meant to condemn the 3 military officers ordered to conduct the autopsy on President Kennedy. As you are about to see, they were put in an impossible situation for nefarious reasons. The methodologies and specific expertise required for a forensic postmortem examination on a person killed by a violent act cannot be underestimated. The consequences of having unqualified general hospital pathologists conduct a forensic examination are about to become abundantly apparent. To put it bluntly, the post-mortem report on President Kennedy by unqualified pathologists, led by Commander James J. Humes, would not have withstood cross-examination at a public trial of accused lone assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. Another act of violence would prevent the inept autopsy from undergoing scrutiny at a public trial. Accused lone assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was gunned down 2 days later by another alleged lone assassin, Jack Ruby. And to officially cover up the historically flawed autopsy by unqualified pathologists, the canceled public trial was replaced by a commission headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren and 6 distinguished politicians. To be certain that the Warren report would be accepted as fact by the American people, President Lyndon Johnson classified tens of thousands of files and sealed them until 2038 in the interests of national security, even though Oswald was labeled a lone nut assassin. With Oswald conveniently out of the way, his guilt could be assured by a flawed JFK autopsy report and a commission willing to interpret or change aspects of the autopsy to fit its lone assassin conclusion. Both happened, as you are about to see. What follows are alarming examples of how the JFK autopsy would have established ample reasonable doubt at a public trial, at which Oswald would have been the accused lone wolf assassin of President Kennedy. A proper post-mortem involving death by gunshot or shots is mandated to ascertain the following about all wounds: point of all bullet entries, origin of the shots, precise damage inflicted by all projectiles, point of exit, if any, for all shots, final destination of all projectiles, retrieval of bullets or fragments, sequence of shots and wounds in the case of multiple firings. The military JFK autopsy woefully failed on all counts. A most basic protocol missed. Forensic pathologists know that wounds may not be as they appear by the time a body arrives for autopsy. In this case, because a routine protocol was not followed by the unqualified autopsy surgeons, the completed post-mortem examination on President Kennedy failed to account for a small throat wound located just below his Adam's apple. And lead autopsy surgeon Dr. Humes contacted Parkland Dr. Malcolm Perry before conducting the post-mortem, as a forensic pathologist would have. He would have learned of the throat wound and would have accounted for it in his autopsy report. Because Dr. Humes did not call the Parkland doctors before the autopsy procedure when JFK's body arrived, the three autopsy surgeons rightly identified this throat wound to be a routine tracheal incision to insert a breathing tube. So over here on the president's throat, you see this wide wound. That is a tracheal incision because the president arrived in respiratory distress and a breathing tube was inserted. What the autopsy doctors and original autopsy report failed to note is that Dr. Perry's tracheal incision obliterated an existing small circular wound as illustrated at left in Robert Groden's book, The Killing of a President. Instead, Dr. Humes called Dr. Perry the next morning and was stunned to realize that he had completed an autopsy report that had not accounted for all the wounds on President Kennedy's body. So what did Dr. Humes do? Dr. Humes burned his original autopsy notes in his home fireplace and revised his report based on no autopsy procedure being done on this wound or ever having seen the original throat wound. This not only changed the official autopsy report submitted to the Warren Commission, but the small circular throat wound was also speculated by the Commission to be from a bullet trajectory. With no proof whatsoever, the Commission concluded that the small puncture in JFK's throat was an exit wound, linking it to a shot from behind the limousine by lone assassin Lee Oswald. With no supportive evidence, the Commission also concluded that the JFK throat wound was the point of exit for a bullet that went on to strike Governor John Connally in the limousine, causing all his non-fatal wounds. The single bullet theory was born, and the single bullet theory says this: the bullet was fired by Oswald from the 6th floor southeast corner window at a downward trajectory, struck the president in the upper back, went up to his throat and exited, and then continued on to strike the Governor Connally in his back near his right armpit, completely transited his chest, went on to strike his right wrist, blew a hole clean through his distal radius bone, and then exited and created a shallow entry wound in his left thigh. That is the single bullet theory the Commission used to name Oswald as the lone assassin of President Kennedy. By declaring the JFK throat wound to be an exit wound for the bullet that went on to strike Connally, the Commission was able to conclude that the 7 non-lethal wounds on the 2 men were from a single shot fired by Oswald, positioned above and behind the limousine. So Oswald was positioned here at the 6th floor southeast corner window, and he shot down onto Elm Street at the president's limousine, moving away from him at 11 miles per hour. To validate the single bullet theory and Oswald as the lone assassin as fact to the American people, yet another significant change had to be made by the Commission, that being the point of entry on JFK for the bullet that exited his throat, per Commission Exhibit 385 at right. So notice in that drawing, you've got the point of entry at the base of the neck, and you've got the point of exit in a downward trajectory in the president's throat just below the Adam's apple. As this autopsy face sheet in the official autopsy report shows, a bullet entry wound was located at JFK's upper back and was measured to be 5 3/4 inches below the collar line and slightly to the right of the spinal column, entering at a downward trajectory of 45 to 60 degrees. So here's the bullet entry wound on the president, according to the official autopsy report, not the base of the neck here. This downward trajectory and bullet entry location was problematic for the Commission's single bullet scenario because it is significantly lower than the stated point of exit at JFK's throat. So what did the Commission do? For this drawing by medical illustrator Harold Rydberg, presented in the Warren Report as factually correct, the back entry wound has been moved up nearly 6 inches to the base of the neck. Why? Since the Commission had to relate all shots as having come from Oswald above and behind JFK, the entry wound at the back, per left, had to be higher than the throat exit wound, as shown at right. To move the back entry wound up nearly 6 inches, the Warren Commission had to ignore more than just the official autopsy report, such as the FBI autopsy report, which states, and during the latter stages of this autopsy, Dr. Humes located an opening, which appeared to be a bullet hole, which was below the shoulders and 2 inches to the right of the middle line of the spinal column. This opening was probed by Dr. Humes with the finger, at which time it was determined that the trajectory of this missile entering at this point had entered at a downward trajectory of 45 to 60 degrees. The FBI report additionally states, further probing by Dr. Humes determined that the distance traveled by this missile was a short distance, inasmuch as the end of the opening could be felt with the finger. At this point, news reached the autopsy room that this nearly whole bullet was found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, which prompted Dr. Humes, without any proof, to conclude, the bullet that entered the president's back entered a short distance and worked its way out of the body during external cardiac massage at the hospital. Whoa, the bullet didn't even transit the body? Then how could the Commission say that this bullet exited JFK's throat and went on to strike Governor Connally? It did so by simply moving the back entry wound up 5 3/4 inches and ignoring other evidence of the back wound location, such as, had the autopsy surgeons followed proper procedure by examining JFK's suit jacket and shirt before starting the post-mortem, they would have verified the back entry wound on President Kennedy to be 5 3/4 inches below the collar line and slightly to the right of the spinal column, which is what you see here in the president's suit jacket. There's the bullet entry wound, and there's the close-up of the wound, and it is located 5 3/4 inches below, not here at the base of the neck again. And Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who helped remove JFK's clothing at the hospital, had this exchange with Commission member Hale Boggs. Boggs, did you see any wound other than the head wound? Hill, yes, sir. I saw an opening in the back, about 6 inches below the neckline, to the right-hand side of the spinal column. Despite the preponderance of evidence, JFK's clothing, the eyewitness account of Agent Hill, the FBI autopsy report, and the official military autopsy report. The Warren Commission, without any evidence, not only decided the bullet did transit JFK's body, it also moved the back wound up 6 inches to the base of the neck to make it higher than the throat wound, because its lone gunman conclusion demanded it. This dilemma should have been resolved at the autopsy, but then this happened. When Dr. Pierre Fink attempted to surgically track the passage of the back bullet wound to confirm Dr. Humes' conclusion of a shallow penetration, a military superior in the room ordered him to halt the procedure. This is just one example of the inadequacy of the military autopsy on JFK. As the civilian forensic pathologist in Dallas, Dr. Earl Rose, he would not have allowed military brass in the autopsy room or followed their procedural orders. The Warren Report and the House Select Committee on Assassinations report 15 years later would also misrepresent the JFK fatal head wounds to name Oswald as the lone assassin. In this Harold Rydberg illustration in the Warren Report, he correctly locates a bullet entry in the right rear of JFK's skull, but there is no large blowout exit wound above JFK's right ear. Instead, considerable evidence suggests a separate shot from the front of the limousine struck JFK in the right front temple area and exited the rear of his skull, causing a fist-sized exit wound as depicted here. For instance, Dr. Robert McClelland, who stood over JFK's head at Parkland Hospital, is one of 46 medical professionals at Parkland and or the autopsy who saw a fist-sized exit wound at the right rear of the skull, as Dr. McClelland demonstrates. In my second book, Dr. Cyril Weck, David Mantic, Michael Chesser, and Gary Aguilar, all of whom examined the JFK x-rays in the National Archives, told me that sizable bone had been blown away at the right rear occipital area of his head, proof of a shot from the front. And Dr. Michael Chesser said he found a small incision at JFK's right forehead, just under his hairline, to obstruct a bullet entry wound, located at left where you see the red rectangular box, right here. So under this red rectangular box right here, where the hair covered by the president's hair in this autopsy photo, Dr. Chesser claims he saw an incision to cover the wound. This is physical evidence of a second shot to JFK's head from in front of him. In addition to repairing a fist-sized blast-out type wound at the right posterior area of President Kennedy's skull, JFK mortician Tom Robinson also reported that he cosmetically repaired what appeared to be a surgical-type wound at the upper forehead, covered by the president's hair, using wax to prevent embalming fluid from leaking out. Dr. Chesser states that the x-rays establish JFK received 2 of the shots to the head a nanosecond apart, a frontal shot likely from a higher caliber weapon and bullet, powerful enough to halt his brief frontal motion, then cause Kennedy's head and upper body to violently slam back against his car seat, as you see here in frame 323 of the Zapruder film. In JFK Case Not Closed, Dr. Chesser says this lateral head x-ray shows yet another bullet having traveled front to back in JFK's upper skull, which the commission had to again misrepresent to fit its lone gunman at rear scenario. How did it do that? Inside the orange triangle in this JFK x-ray, the line of multiple white dots are what Dr. Chesser describes as a snowstorm of metallic fragments left by a bullet that entered JFK's forehead at the hairline and traversed his upper brain without exiting. So here you have the triangle and this line of white dots traveling front to back are bullet fragments left behind by a bullet that struck the president in the skull. However, the point of entry of the bullet striking JFK at the back of the head, per this medical illustration, was too low to deposit the snowstorm of bullet fragments left in the upper brain. So what did the Warren Commission do? For the second time, the Commission moved the JFK bullet entry wound up, this time to better align it with the snowstorm of metallic fragments in the upper brain, citing it as proof that the only JFK headshot came from a lone gunman above and behind the limousine. 15 years later, the House Select Committee on Assassinations accepted the higher entry wound as fact, having its artist, Ida Dogs, locate the bullet entry at the crown area or cowlick area of the skull per this illustration here. So here's we have the bullet entry wound on the House Select Committee diagram, pretty much centered to the crown area of the skull. Not over here where it was replaced by the medical illustration by Harold Rydberg. If there was only one headshot from one assassin in the back of JFK, why was it necessary for two official inquiries to change the point of entry for that shot per these illustrations? As you can see, they're just not the same. Qualified forensic pathologists like Dr. Cyril Weck or David Bantic at Wright would have testified that the JFK head x-ray shows sizable bone missing at the right rear occipital lobe area of the skull, proof of a shot from in front of JFK. Neurologists like Dr. Michael Chesser would have testified that a second shot from the front, as shown in this JFK x-ray, left a line of metallic debris front to back, nearly the full length of the upper brain. And ballistic experts would have testified that a copper-jacketed bullet fired from Oswald's rifle would not have disintegrated in soft brain tissue. Instead, a frangible or dum-dum type of bullet would leave a snowstorm of fragments along its pathway due to a higher energy discharge. As many as 46 medical experts would have testified that they observed a gaping blast-out type exit wound at the right rear occipital lobe area of JFK's skull, as located here in light purple. Tragically, we should know everything about the head wounds sustained by President Kennedy, such as the number of bullets that struck his head, exactly where they struck him, and the damage they inflicted. But his brain went missing, and no report was filed. Because JFK's death was due to a head trauma, the remainder of his brain was removed and placed in formaldehyde to harden it. Per procedure, if the brain was sectioned into thin slices to track bullet trajectories, recover metallic fragments, and issue a report of findings, the slides also went missing. Because Jack Ruby executed Oswald, the Warren Commission took the place of a public trial, but without the legal obligation to prove Oswald's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt as the lone assassin of President Kennedy. Dr. Cyril Weck, whose expertise has been sought in many high-profile cases, such as John Benet Ramsey, believed the autopsy performed on JFK would have been totally discredited at a public trial had Oswald lived. Dr. Weck, among the first qualified forensic pathologists to examine the JFK autopsy materials in the National Archives, claimed in my first book that the entry wounds on Kennedy's back and head were completely misrepresented by the Commission. Autopsy results are often vital evidence presented at trial in determining the guilt or innocence of the accused. It is meant to replace all speculation with irrefutable scientific fact of what happened to a victim. Can you imagine the verdict of a jury in the matter of the state of Texas versus Lee Harvey Oswald? Had a skilled defense attorney like Mark Lane presented all this reasonable doubt pertaining to the president's autopsy and other evidence? Of all the evidence in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the official autopsy report provides the most glaring examples of key evidence dismissed ignored, omitted, altered, or suppressed to frame Lee Oswald as the lone assassin.